Alright, so we've got our actor here, projectile base. There's a really cool component up here under the components section. It's called projectile movement. And this is a really neat component. It'll move stuff for you, through the editor, right? You can change the speed, right? There's initial speed, max speed. You can have it go in world space or local space. So if you want it to always go in one direction, right? Or if you want it to be relative to wherever it's looking, where it's spawned. Default in Unreal is usually the X direction, right? There's projectile gravity scale. So if you want it to be like a bomb or grenade or something like that, you can give it an arc. And then if you change this to 0, just keep flying on forever, basically, until it hits something. You have some sort of event built in here to get rid of it. It can bounce. There's options for bouncing, which is pretty cool. Homing is really neat. It says is homing projectile, and then you can give it a target, and it'll accelerate towards that, like a homing missile or something. And then there's some other options down here for, physics-based stuff. Yeah, if it's not using the nav mesh, you could maybe.
Okay.
If it was like maybe something flying,
Okay.
you do something like that because it's kind of overriding the physics. This is not the physics system. Like if you turn on, if you add like, I don't know, a static mesh or whatever, right?
Oh, okay.
And then down here, where is that? Yeah, simulate physics, right? You can enable gravity, right? But this is not the same system as this. This is something completely different.
So like if you wanted to make ghosts, that would be probably better because they would go through meshes instead.
Depending on what the collision settings are, yeah.
Okay, cool.
I think there were some ghosts like that in what was that game, Gauntlet? They would like go through walls and stuff, trying to chase you down. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Mhm. Yeah, it was a fun game. All right, so we got our projectile movement. I'm going to change the initial speed to like, I don't know, 1,000. Start with 50,000. Whatever it takes. Now we're going to be spawning this from the third-person character, right? On a key press, or maybe we'll do it with a mouse button. So when you spawn something in the game, it has options for like where do you want to spawn it, right? The location, rotation, scale, and all that. Specifically for this, because we want to have collision on it. If it hits something, I need to add a volume for that. So I'm going to let's do a capsule, I'll do sphere, that's fine. And I'm going to drag this onto the default scene route. So if you just click this and drag it up to the top, and that will become the new route. Anything that has physics on it, or you want it to collide with something while it's moving, the collision has to be on the route. Otherwise, it won't work. So we've got our sphere here, right, for our collision. I'm also going to add let's do a sphere component, and then I'm going to scale it down, and I'm going to scale it this way. So we might have to scale this down a little bit. I'm thinking this is going to be kind of like a laser. Alright, so we've got our sphere collision. We've got our projectile mesh. Or if you had like a particle system, right, you could put that in here. for moving through space. I'm going to disable the collision on this component here, the static mesh, because we're going to use this one instead. So let's change the collision preset for this to none. Down here, no collision. If you change it to custom, you can change all these settings here. I think we did that maybe a couple classes ago. And then for sphere, I want to make sure that's set to custom, and then I want to hit ignore, so it'll ignore all these different collision channels, right? And then I want it to only block world static for right now. If you wanted later on to like have this, hit enemies or anything that's like a pawn character or whatever, there's a channel for that. There's one for static, world dynamic. The camera, I usually turn the camera one off. That's only useful if like you have a third-person camera rig, right? And like when you go into a building and they'll kind of get closer to you, they'll zoom in so it doesn't clip through the walls or anything. That's what that's for. Mm-hmm. Oh, I just created it. It's the sphere. I just renamed it.
Oh, so if I just have projectile and move in sphere, I should be okay.
I've got, this one is the actual like collision. So if I type in sphere collision, that's what that is. Okay. And then I drag that on top of the scene root to make it the new root. Yeah. So this is at the top, and then this 3D model is now the child, basically, child component.
And you just pretty much named it projectile?
I just named it, yeah. Okay. Alright, so we've got those components in there. Next thing we need to do, and Tyler, make sure that this is set to only block world static. You change it to custom.
Yeah, it's set custom, and then everything is on ignore except for world static.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Or block.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
And then the projectile mesh, yeah, no collision.
Yeah, that's the one I had at no collision. Okay, cool.
Alright, so what we want to do now is I'm going to go to the event graph. And I'm going to get rid of these. We don't need those there. And then I'm going to take my sphere collision here, right? And then I'm going to right click and we're going to add an event. And there's one that says add on component hit. So when this sphere hits something, right? We can have it apply, either damage or whatever. Right now, I'm just going to do destroy. So it hits something, and it goes away. Real simple for now. I'm going to compile and save that. And then I want to check the size of that blueprint in the world. So I'm actually going to, I'm going to drag that in here. That looks more like a missile. It's a little big. So I want to go back in here and I'm going to scale this down a little bit. So maybe we'll make this, let's do like 15. 10 maybe for the sphere radius, and the projectile mesh I'm just going to scale it down to fit inside, so let's see, 0.5. Yeah, that's a little bit better. There we go. Whoops. A little bit better now. I'm going to delete these hazards here. What's that? Post-process. Okay. Not the floor. There we go. Alright, good enough. Put my content browser over here. Much better. Yeah, so there's our projectile, right? And whatever the x direction is, right, the direction where it's pointing is where it's going to fly. And we turned off gravity and the projectile movement, right? We set the projectile gravity scale at 0. So this is going to go, and if it hits something, it's going to go away, right? So I'm going to take a couple of these. And I'm going to put them up here. And I'm going to duplicate it. And I'm going to hit play and I want to see what happens. Yes, they went away. Good. So if you want to drag a couple of those into your map, see them move, and when they hit something, make sure that they actually go away. So there they are, and deleted. There they go. Cool. So 1,000 is a decent speed. If you're doing more like a bullet tracer, whatever, that'd probably be a lot faster. Projectiles, you always move a little bit slower, you know, depending on their size or their velocity, right? And then let's say for some reason we wanted to turn gravity scale back on, right? If I change it to 1, see them go. Yeah, see, mine doesn't do that because I didn't have that turned on, right? So this is what happens. They just kind of like, ah. Try it again.
So which one would I turn off? Physics for?
To do what now?
Make you go straight?
It does feel a lot.
Oh, yeah, to turn off the gravity. Yeah, so this is projectile gravity scale under the projectile movement component. Yeah, there is an option that says rotation follows gravity. Yeah, see, now they just kind of dive into the ground like a missile. That's if we turn on this checkbox right here. Rotation follows velocity. And then as long as initial velocity and local space is turned on, doesn't matter which way it's going, right? It'll keep going in, you know, wherever it's rotated in the world. So these are going in the x direction right now. Let's say that I had one that was going up a little bit like that. So if I hit simulate, these two are going to go straight, right? This one's going to go, yeah, straight up. See? So with the projectile gravity on, you see this one went a little bit further because it's angled up. Did y'all ever play that old tanks game that was on like the iPhone and whatever? I forget what it was called. Pocket tanks. Yeah, we had to get the projectile. Yeah. So I mean, like, this is, you know, they probably did a lot more math. Unreal's doing it mostly for you, which is nice. But like, yeah, if you angled your tank barrel up, right? It's gonna go a little bit further. At some point, you're gonna get like diminishing returns, right? If you do like something like that, it's just gonna go, right? So yeah, that's what the projectile gravity scale does. I'm gonna turn that back to 0. All right, and I'm gonna delete these since we know that they work. Now we're gonna try to spawn them in the world from the player. So I'm going to go to third person blueprint folder, and then we've got our, let's see, player character. I'm going to do it in player character. You can do it whichever one you'd like. This is the one we set up last time. We just duplicated it. I'm going to unhook this left mouse button from the montage that we did last time. I think it was some sort of an attack, right? Some sort of action. I'm going to do this. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. It's a node called spawn actor from class. And I'll say spawn actor none because we don't have one assigned yet, right? And then it has a little drop down menu. It says spawn, transform, collision handling, owner, all that kind of stuff, right? Now, do y'all remember what a purple variable type means? Anybody? If it's blue, it's in the world, right? So what would purple mean? It's basically a template. So like when we create think of an actual blueprint for creating something, right? You've created it here, right? Our projectile base, but it's not in the world yet. So when we spawn it, we're saying, hey, what type of blueprint is this? Do you want to spawn? So you could spawn anything. In this instance, we're just spawning the projectile. So if you click on the little drop down here, have all the different actor classes that you can spawn, and we'll type in projectile base. Right? So now that that's filled out, we have some other options here. We have the transform, right? A transform is what? Yeah, so location, rotation, and scale. And then collision handling, this is important, especially for projectiles. It's like basically what happens if it spawns and it hits something immediately. What should we do? There's a couple of different options down here. You can pick whichever one will best suit the kind of functionality you're trying to get. In this instance, I'm going to do always spawn, ignore collisions for now. And then we have something called owner, right? And this is what blueprint in the game owns this new actor. So we could say the player owns this projectile because we're spawning it, right? Or if I have a sniper, and then you fire the sniper, and the sniper fires the bullet, right? Or spawns the actor, maybe it would belong to the sniper. And then something down here is called an instigator. This basically means if it applies damage, who did that damage, basically. So if you've ever played Clue, right? So I don't know, was it Mustard, Dr. Mustard, somewhere? Colonel Mustard, Colonel Sanders. Colonel Sanders got Mr. Mustard in the kitchen with a bagel. I don't know. It's a hard bagel. A Chicago bagel, yeah. Right, so who would be the owner? Yeah, the player, right? So we could type self as the owner, because that's this blueprint that's spawning it. And then if this applies damage to something, who did it, right? This is also self. This is really useful when you do games, that track how many kills you get, like with a certain weapon type, or multiplayer, like Kenny, you got Tyler with the shotgun, right? And it has up in the corner or whatever. Yeah. They'll just say, hey, so-and-so got so-and-so, and then the instigator, would be like, who did that? So if it hits something on their side, it says apply damage. It's like, who applied that to me? And it's whatever this is. Now, if you hit compile and save, what happens? Error. What does it say down here?
You basically need to have a place where it spawns from.
Right, there's no spawn transform. You can make a transform like this, right? Make transform, and then you can hook the orange pin up. Sometimes what I'll do, though, is just right-click on it and then split. This is called a structure, right? So we split those into its individual variables, and then like, see, this is 3 floats, right? A vector, 3 floats. We could split it again, right? And then there's an option to recombine it. So if you don't want to have it split, you can right-click on it and see if there's an option to recombine it. Kind of like a zip file or something. Did you have a question, Kevin? Okay. Just stretching. All right. All right, so I'm just going to split that for now. And if you hit compile again, see that error goes away. It's because if you have a transform, there's nothing hooked up to it. It won't work. But if you split it, at least you have that. Or you can do that make transform node, right? Okay, so question now becomes, where do we want to spawn this? Where should we spawn this here? His eyes. So that, for projectiles, because just spawning regular actors, you can spawn them anywhere, you just get the location, right? With projectiles, yeah, you have a couple of options. If it's like an ability or whatever, right? Maybe say he has like Superman laser eyes projectiles, right? What we could do is add a component for that, right? We could create, sometimes I'll usually create an arrow component, right? And then you can take the arrow and put it, on top of, any of these other components. So I'm going to put it on top of the mesh. And then you can move it around the scene. We'll put it right here where his eyes are for now. And then maybe call this laser spawn. This guy's looking like Doomsday a little bit, so with pants. Does Doomsday have pants? No. He doesn't wear. Doomsday does not require pants. Looks like he's been in a couple of. He's. Well, it says 08. So is he the 8th copy, or is that was like he was in the space? What was that Superman space prison?
Oh, the negative zone.
The Phantom Zone or something,
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah. All right, so we have our spawn, right? So one option is you can create a component to spawn off of. Arrows are usually just show you in a direction, right? Another way is to have it spawn based on where the camera's looking, right? So in the direction of the camera. And then another is actually on the mesh, right? But from a socket. So like, let's say you have a character, right? Or a weapon, something like that, and it has a skeletal structure. They have sockets or bones, right? And then you can attach those, attach something to that. So let's say if we attach this to his, I don't know, left shoulder, and I set it at 0, 0, 0. Yeah. So let's say scabby. Yeah. Oh, it's coming out of his back now. But see, it's attached to the character, right? To his skeleton, and then we can move it and do whatever. So yeah, you can leave it in the blueprint, right, as a component. Just leave it there. You can have it on the mesh as a socket. You can attach it to the camera. So it depends on what you want to do with it, right? All right, so now I'm going to go back to the event graph. Oh, did I lose that? Edit, redo. There we go. I went back too far and it got rid of the laser spawn name. All right, so in here, in the event graph, I'm going to take my laser spawn arrow component, and I'm going to drag and drop that into the graph. And then I'm going to pull a pin off of it, like this. And I'm going to type get world location. here is a blueprint tip for you. Whenever you see it says get world location, that is referring to a component. If it says actor, that means the actual actor in the scene. So we want just the location of this, essentially. We don't want this, because that's referring to basically all of it, this top section here. So get world location of the laser spawn, and then this is yellow, that's yellow. Let's hook them up for the location.
Weird. Mine is orange. Mine's orange.
Oh, you gotta split this, Nick.
Oh.
This part right here.
Oh.
Yeah, right click on it. Or unhook it. Yeah, right click on it and then do split. Yeah, there we go. Split. Yeah, what was happening to Nick is he had this hooked up to here, and it'll try to convert it for you. So you can do that. All you have to do is just drag and see if it'll let you do it or not. And if it has a little like warning or basically it says no. It says no. You can't do that. It's not allowed. So spawn transform location, and then let's do another one and type in get world rotation. So this one's purple, and I'm going to hook that up here. And then we've got, the last one is scale. Now I usually don't, I'm going to move this up here real quick. I usually don't have that hooked up to the scale of the component, because if this is scaled down really small or whatever, that's going to affect this. I kind of want that to be independent. So what I usually do is take this and just promote it. Right, so we can call this projectile scale. You talking about promoting it?
Yeah, is there a reason why you promote it rather than do it from the spawn?
Oh, doing it from this one. Because if this is not the same size as my, oops. If this is not the same size as my projectile, it's going to cause it to be off. See, let's say my scale here was 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, right?
Yeah.
If I spawn this and assume this is a value of 1, and it's like, oh, it's supposed to be this big, and I get in there, it's like, why is it always small? When it spawns, that's because this is half the size. So I don't really want it to be dependent on this. I want to be able to change that with another separate value. We're basically just using this to say, hey, where is it going? Which way is it rotated? Okay, so we've got our input, right? Left mouse button. Spawn actor from class, projectile base. It spawns from the world location of the laser spawn and its world rotation. A separate scale variable. And then the owner, an instigator, is itself. Alright, so let's go to the game and see if this works. If it does not work for you, the first thing you probably want to check to see is if the arrow component, right, is too close to the capsule of the character. I have laser eyes. I have special eyes. My brand. I see you. Whee! So it only fires once, right? Every time we spawn it. I have to keep clicking it for it to keep going. And there's no limit, right? So gameplay wise, for a projectile you have to consider. Is this something that you can do all the time? Is this something you have to get an item to do, or a power up, right? You know, what are the conditions for you to be able to use this? And then, like, if you pick up, let's say you pick up ammo, right, or coins, or, you know, whatever it is, then you can use it more often, and it'll subtract. So let's say, you know, every time I pick up one of these, right, it gives me a new one. And then I can have a number that goes down, and if it's gone, then I can't use it anymore, right? It's a scenario. But yeah, spawning actors is pretty simple. Just need a location, rotation, scale. And then you just kind of play with the settings to get it to work exactly like you want. Now, one thing you might notice is if you're doing the third person character, it only goes in one direction, right? It's not based off of my camera, right? It's because the arrow is right in front of his eyeballs. If you do want it based off of the camera, you could do something like this. We're going to get the location of the laser spawn, but the world rotation, I'm actually going to use the follow camera. So I just swap this out here, and we can test it out and see if that works. In first-person shooters, what they usually do is they have, what we're going to talk about in a little bit, a line trace that goes directly from the camera, right, into the world. And it's lined up with some sort of crosshair. And then from the weapon or whatever you're holding, if it's kind of, you know, old games used to have, like Doom and stuff has the weapon right in the middle of the screen. Newer games have it kind of offset like you're holding or whatever, right? So they'll do a camera line trace into the world in the center of the screen. Or Halo, have you played Halo? You notice that their crosshair is a little bit lower on the screen. It's not centered. Fun fact of the day. But your weapon is kind of somewhat pointed towards the center of the screen, and then they'll basically fire either a projectile or another line trace to line those up. All right, because I don't know if anybody tried the first-person template for the Unreal projects. Those little yellow projectiles that you shoot, they don't go towards the center of the screen at all, because they're not doing any sort of calculation to figure that out. It just kind of launches it into the world, and I think they have gravity, and they bounce or whatever. Like little grenades that don't hurt you.
They're fun to modify.
They're fun to modify, yes. Yeah, Roderick's working on a project. Actually, I think he has his computer right now. He's using that.
That's what I'm working on right now.
Projectiles that have different properties and different colors depending on what you can use them for and what they interact with. So if you ever get a chance, ask him to show you his project. He can show you a couple things. Alright, I'm going to try this out and then see if I did this correctly. Alright, cool. So now that we're using the world location of the arrow component, and we're using the rotation of the camera, see how it's always going where I'm looking. So I can look all around, keep firing, right? And it'll go in that direction.
That is terrifying.
We were talking about earlier, he kind of looks like Doomsday. With pants.
Yeah.
With pants.
He was arrested because he didn't have pants.
But now he has pants. Now he has pants. You get to go back into society if you have pants. Yeah.
No pants, no service.
That's right.
Everything else is
Alright, so yeah, spawning actors is pretty simple. If it's not working or not spawning like you want it to, one thing that you could do is change the collision handling override, right? Another option is in the projectile, make sure that it's not colliding with pawns, right? If your character's spawning it and you're only shooting stuff in the world, not other characters or whatever, you've got that option. Inside of here, or actually in any blueprint, you can type in something called get owner, right? And then if an owner was set on here, you can get that and say, hey, what is this exactly? And if it equals, see, get player pawn, something like that. And then we'll say, no, it does not. Then you can go ahead and destroy it. Something like that. There's not a whole lot of collision channels in the engine by default, but the cool part is you can create your own. So after everybody gets this part, we'll look at that real quick. I believe that's up in the project settings. Yeah, so let's say if I go into edit project settings here, and then there's a tab down here for collision under the engine header, and then you have a couple different object channels and trace channels. So object is like actually in the world, right? It's an object. Trace is the stuff we're going to talk about later, where it's like it's drawing a line or a different shape through the space, right? So if I did new object channel, and let's say player, and then you have default responses. So I'm going to say ignore for now. See, it added a new collision response, and it has this option here. And if I close that and go back to our projectile base, on the sphere, if I go to the collision presets, right, since it's custom now, see there's an option at the bottom that says player. So you can add as many, well, not as many, I think, what did that say, 16? Let me check real quick. 18 custom channels. That's a lot. So yeah, you can add up to 18 plus all of these. So let's say you have one for enemy, or player, projectile, vehicle. They already have vehicle. Whatever you want. So now this will ignore player, right? And this is just a precaution just in case. And then what I want to do here is, let's say that I have a variable in here for how much damage it does, right? I'm going to create a float value. I'm going to call this, let's call it base damage. And I'm going to make that a float. Bless you. I'm going to make it instance editable, so let's turn on the eyeball. And then up here in the top right corner, it will say expose on spawn. So when we spawn this projectile now, and this is turned on, this variable will show up in the spawn actor node. So as long as instance editable is turned on, expose on spawn is turned on, compile, save, and go back to the character, we have a new input here, and it says base damage. So when you spawn the actor, you can give it properties before it even gets into the world, which is really cool. So let's say, I don't know, let's say it does 15 damage or something. 1 million damage. Okay. 1 million. So you type a number in here, and then inside of projectile base, let's do this just to make sure it works. I'm going to do a print string between the branch and the destroy actor, and then I'm just going to drag in the base damage. No, I'm not. Okay, let's do that. Drag it into the graph first, and then you can drag it, the pink, into the end string. It'll convert it. And then hit compile. Okay. Let's go back to the game. And then if it hits something now, it should print. Oh, hang on. What did I miss? Hit honor equals player spawn. Oh, I did this wrong. Oops. This part right here, go ahead and get rid of that. I messed this up. Wow. We actually want to check this against what it hit. So you can get rid of that, and I'm just going to put other actor into the other pin. Yeah, you just type equal twice. This is checking to see if two blueprints are the same. So they weren't being destroyed because get owner actually does equal our player character. So, but we had it set to false, but that would always return true. So now it's saying, hey, what did I hit? Is it the owner? No? Okay, good. Let's go ahead and print a string and then destroy it. Alright, let's try that again. There we go. So now if it hits something, it should print out in the top left corner a number. Is it getting to print out on the screen for anybody? Not print anything? Make sure that you have this in here. I'm going to leave this up. Do what now? No. Just pull a pin off of the blue return value on get owner. There we go. So with projectiles, if it's not doing what you want it to do, when we do debugging, right? You start at step 1, right? So this is the first instance of something happening, right? And you add a string here, right? Does that work? Good. And add a string here, right? It's good. Oh, okay, over here it stopped working. Then that's probably your problem. Next option is, you can check your collision settings. So make sure that these are set up. Make sure that these are set up right. So this one says collision settings pawn for the character. So it won't hit that because we have that ignored here. This will only hit world static. Anything that you drag and drop into the scene by default should be world static unless it's a blueprint, and it's probably world dynamic. Alright, so and over here we had, when it's hit, other actor equals get owner. And then that goes to the branch. If it's false, it's not the owner, in this case the player, because you don't want to fire a projectile and shoot yourself. That would not be good. And then we have a print string and then destroy actor. And back on here, we have all these settings here. If it's not printing out anything, one thing you might check is make sure that the projectiles aren't hitting each other. That would be one reason for creating one of those collision response channels in the project settings, right? So if we had one called projectile maybe, and then in the projectile collision, say, hey, have it set to that channel. This is a projectile, but we don't want to overlap or block other projectiles, right? Yeah, so whenever you want to spawn an actor and then have other variables that you can change before it spawns, right? Kind of modifying it before it's in the world. Just want to create it and then make sure that it's instance editable and it's exposed on spawn, so I'll show up here. Okay. Now let's say that you wanted to spawn projectiles when you're holding down a button, and when I let go, it stops. How could we do that? Anybody?
Well, it says release, right? So when you click and release it, would it do it? So is there something where it's like left mouse click hold that command, or?
Not exactly, but we can set it up to do that, yes. So yeah, when we press it, it starts, right? And it loops, and then you release it and it would stop. Yeah, so we definitely would use both of these. A way that you could do this, right? Let me unhook that from the left mouse button input from the spawn projectile base. I'll move it up here real quick. There's something that you can use called a timer. I don't know if we've talked about this yet. We've talked about timelines. I think we talked about timers, yeah. So set timers are really cool. Basically, it'll just keep running until you tell it to pause or stop, right? Or go away. You can create an event, a custom event in a graph, and then have it linked to that. You can also create a function and then just type in the function name as well. I'm going to do this as a function, just show you how this works. Or I'll actually show you both nodes by event. Alright, so here's the function one, right? You just type whatever your function name is, just type that into here verbatim, right? And then there's options for how often do you want to do this, right? And then if it's turned looping on, it'll just keep going after this many seconds. And there's a pin if you want to save that. It's called a timer handle. And then you can modify it later, like, hey, pause, or stop, clear. I think it's called clear and invalidate, something like that. So that's by function name, and then this one is by event. So you can take this pin right here and hook it up to a custom event, right? So let's say I had one called spawn lasers, something like that. See this little pin here? You could hook it up to that event. And now these are linked. So let's say I called set timer by event. It's going to run this event this often, and then you decide whether it's going to loop or not. Another way you can link these is called a delegate. These little pins here. If you don't want them wired like that, you want it wireless, you can use this. If you pull the pin off from here, right, and then type in create event, and then once you already have your function or your event here, you can just click on the drop down and try to find it. So mine says spawn lasers right here. So now it doesn't matter where it is in the world, they're not connected like that. So that's how you would hook up an event, right? I'm just going to do it by function, so we can take all this logic and put it over here, right? So I'm going to set this to looping, and then I'm going to take all of this here, all of these nodes, and then I'm going to right click on one of them, and let's do collapse to function. So it kind of zips it up, and we'll call this one spawn lasers. And then if you double click on it, see here's the spawn actor stuff that we did just a minute ago in its own graph. So I actually don't need this function to be in the inside of the event graph, but I can just copy this name here, right, and then paste it inside of the function name on the set timer. And then where it says object here, this is basically like what blueprint is going to run this function. Well, it's this blueprint, so you don't have to put anything here. Yeah, object, you can leave that. Should be able to leave that blank, unless it's a different blueprint. And then over here, I want to turn on looping. We'll change this time here in a second. And then I'm going to pull a pin off, right, and let go. And then I'm going to promote it. So this is basically saving a reference to the timer so we can pause it later. So I'm going to call this laser handler, or laser timer handler, something like that. So I press the left mouse button, it's going to set the timer, it's going to loop, it's going to keep doing spawn lasers because it's looping, and we're going to save it so that we can do this. From the released pin on the input right here, we want to do this. It's called clear and invalidate. And it's asking for a handle. Well, we already have a handle because we just saved it here. So I'm just going to take this variable and drag it, drop it into here. And the last thing we want to do is make sure that we set up our time variable. So this is the number of seconds in between each time it calls this timer. So let's say I set it to 1. It's gonna, as soon as I press the left mouse button, it is gonna wait 1 second, and then it's gonna run the function. So press the button, wait 1 second, spawn laser, wait 1 second, spawn laser, wait 1 second, spawn laser, until we release the left mouse button, and then it'll stop. What's really cool about this is we can actually have it use a little math, right, to get the fire rate. So if I pull a pin off here, right, and then I hit the / key or the question mark key on the keyboard, it'll say float divided by float. And then if I put the number 1 up here, and then promote this to a variable, this is now our fire rate per second. So number of projectiles per second. So if, let me go and name it here. If our fire rate is 1, how many projectiles are spawned per second? What's 1 divided by 1? 1. What if our fire rate is 2? How many projectiles are we spawning per second? 2. Because 1 divided by 2 is 0.5, so every half second it's spawning a projectile, so that means 2. Now some games do it like RPM, like rounds per minute or whatever. So you would take this per second, right? And then you could do some math to fit it into a value of 60. What's up, Tate?
Yeah, I'm here to work.
Yeah, you're good. So I'm going to type in 2, right? And as long as we have this stuff set up, right? We have the function name, we have the timer handler, we got the time in between, right? So how many are we spawning every second? Set to looping, and when we let go, it's going to stop it. Then if I go into the game, try it out, see it's spawning 2 per second, and if I let go, it stops. So 2 is not very fast, is it? No. Let's bump that up a little bit. How about like 15? There we go. So it's rapid fire, right? And then when I let go, it stops. So if you get into your game and test it out, see if that works. And then, let go, see if it stops. Does that work for you guys? It does? Okay, good. Now there's one issue with this, and it's hard to see when you have a lot of projectiles firing at once. I'm going to change this back to 1 for the fire rate. When I pressed down the left mouse button, why did it take a second before it started spawning? It's gotta wait this long before it spawns 1. So if you want to spawn immediately, what do you think we should do? What could we do? Yeah, so if you want it to spawn immediately instead of having to wait, we're going to drag in our function here, hook it up to pressed. So go ahead and spawn a laser, just 1, and then go ahead and wait this long, and then fire the rest of them. Bring this this a little bit closer. There we go. So as soon as we click it, it'll spawn one, and then it'll start doing the timer. And then if you try it again, it'll fire it on the first click. And then, well, as long as you hold it, the timer's still running. So the fact that you're holding down the mouse button really has nothing to do with the rapid fire. It has to do with starting the timer, and it's looping forever. When you let go, that's when it actually stops it. But it feels like you're, like all over the place. So functionally, this works. If you're doing an action game, responding projectiles like that, things that you could do to make it real juicy, right? Maybe you juicy, yeah. Maybe you give some screen shake in there, right? So it's kind of like moving around a little bit. If you're on a controller, maybe you give some, force feedback. I think that's what they call it in Unreal. Some controller vibration, muzzle flash, sounds, all that stuff, right? That's how you can get it to feel pretty nice. All right. That's all we're going to do for projectiles right now. Next thing we're going to try is doing a line trace. So I'm actually going to leave this here, right? But I'm going to make a new function. You're good. I'm going to make a new function. I'm going to call it line trace. Has anybody heard of a hit scan before? Yeah. You don't know what is a hit scan?
Line up with it, you click, you hit it.
There you go. Yep. So like snipers in Unreal Tournament, right?
Yeah.
Or the pistol or the minigun.
Your bullet users.
Yeah. Anything you look at, as long as you have line of sight, bam, hit it. So that's using a line trace. Now this is going to take a little bit of math, so just a little bit. Fortunately, I'm going to show you what the math is, and then Unreal will handle the hard part, right? You just have to kind of wrap your head around how this works. Let's pull a pin off and type in line trace by channel. Alright, see you later. Line trace by channel. So here it says we have a start point, right? We have an end point. We have a section for like what is it hitting, right? Things to ignore, and then whether or not we want to actually see it for testing purposes. It says draw debug type down here. And then here's what it hit. So in this instance, what we want to do is I'm going to get follow camera and put it in here. And I'm going to hook it up to the start. Do y'all remember what node we had to grab earlier in order to hook this up? It's in the spawn lasers function. What do we have to hook this up to first? Get world location. Yep. I need to move this over here. Here's a little math. Get world location. Great. First part done. End point, a little bit tricky.
Is that would it also be your world location or the actor location?
Well, it's fine. Let's say that I'm looking at you, right, Tyler? I'm looking at your screen, and my camera is my eyeballs, right? So this is the start of the line trace. And if I want it to hit your screen, right, I'm going to draw a line. I'm going to figure out where it goes with math, right? So we need to know the start location is here, obviously. The end location is based off where I start, the rotation, and then do y'all remember what the term vector refers to from math or science classes? It's a direction and a magnitude. So the direction is like which way is it looking, right? And the magnitude is how far that line goes, right? So if I have the file camera world location, we want to find the direction first. So you can pull a pin off and type in get world rotation. All right. And then we want to get believe it's forward vector, yeah. So whichever way we're looking, we're going to get that direction. So this part is our direction, and then the magnitude, we want to take this number and multiply it by another value. So I want to do this. Let me pull this pin off here. We're going to do vector times float. Move this back a little bit more. Just need a little bit more room. So see which way it's looking, right? And then we're going to get a vector, which is going directly out forward from that point. And then we're going to stretch that line with this number here. So I'm going to do this really far. I'm going to type in 5,000. Right? And you can promote this to a variable if you want. And then I need to add this to this. So vector plus vector. And then take that result and put it into end. I think I got this right. It's been a day or two since I've used it. So we have, like, where do you want to spawn it, right? Basically spawning a line in the world. Where does it start and where does it end? So direction, magnitude, and then we're going to add it back to this so we can get the end point. The reason for doing this is basically so that it lines up with wherever you started. So let's say I'm looking at Tyler's screen, right? But then all of a sudden I start looking at Kenny's screen, and then I do the line trace, but I don't add in the starting location. It's just going to go off into the world wherever the camera was looking, and not necessarily where it is now, from what I understand. So you'll get the endpoint, but it's not going in the right rotation, right? Now we have a trace channel here, which I'm going to leave on visibility, right? I want to change the draw debug type to for duration. This means it's going to stay on screen for a little bit. It'll be a red line, and if it hits something, it'll draw a little square, and you'll see it show up. I want to make sure that our capsule and our character here are not blocking visibility. So yeah, character visibility, ignore. And then capsule visibility, ignore. Good. And then I want to make sure that I turn off spawn lasers for right now. And I'm going to drag and drop the line trace in here, because we already have this other stuff set up, right? And then I'm going to type in the function name here, so line trace. So we're basically using the same functionality. Instead of firing a projectile, we're firing a line trace, like a sniper or something. Another thing you could use line trace for is for seeing how far something is away, right? And you could also use it for in first-person games or third-person games for picking something up. So let's say you go over an item and your character's looking at it and it's doing a line trace, like, hey, I hit an item, and they'll show it on the screen. Hey, do you want to pick this up? Press E or F or something like that. Alright, I'm going to try this. Alright, so see, it's drawing line traces from the camera location. So if you don't move the camera, probably won't be able to see it. And then I turn, right? And then it'll draw a square wherever it's looking. And it's probably right in the middle of the screen, right? So if I look at a wall, right? Bam, I hit it. Line traces usually work over the course of one frame. So if the game is running 60 frames a second, it only took one of those to do the line trace, so really fast. And if I have rapid fire turned on, you know, I change this to something higher than, you know, maybe 5 maybe. You now, Kevin?
No.
Oh, he's coming. Oh, okay. Alright, and then anywhere that there's a square is what it hit. And since we set it to a value of 5,000, it's going pretty far, right? If I set it to a little bit shorter, let's say like 500, it's going to draw a line, right? But it didn't hit anything, so there's no square. If I look down, right, it's like, oh, I'm hitting something. Okay, now I'm hitting something. Alright? So the reason for having this number here is that's our magnitude. That's how far the line trace goes. So when you multiply it by a number, what, I put 5,000? Yeah. Multiply it by a number, it's stretching that line. So this is useful for a lot of things, not just you know, things like, you know, weapons and whatnot. You could do this for, let's say you had a like a physics-based racing game or something, and you wanted to check to see if you know, if the vehicle is, you know, hitting a wall or something, right? Well, if you have a line trace running and then it hits something, maybe you can have it like kind of readjust, right? So like, if y'all have ever played Halo, right? You know, like the ghosts and whatnot, they kind of hover and whatnot. So do a line trace to see what's hitting, and maybe you go over a rock, right? There's a line trace, and it'll push it up. It'll say, hey, if I hit something, you need to use thrusters and push it up a little bit. Use it for something like that. The debug type, you usually don't want to see that in the game. That's mainly for just testing, make sure it works. So you probably leave that to none when you're actually letting somebody play it. And then over here you have a lot of options for like what it hit, and that's called the out hit. That is also on this event here. So like on component overlap, on component hit, they have this little blue pin right here, right? It's also on the line trace. If you split it, right, or break it, it'll have lots of different properties that you can see what it hit. So like, hey, where did it hit? How long did it take till the hit happened from when I actually fired it? Where's the start? Where's the end? What's the normal like? So if it's facing back at me, kind of like if you hit a ball in pool, right? A cue ball, and then it hits the side, right? And you can see, okay, which way is it going to go now? Impact point, normal, all that good stuff. The coolest one is probably this one. It's what actual physical material type did it hit. So if you have a sniper, whatever, and then you hit a wall that's made out of brick, and it says, hey, this is made out of brick, well, you can spawn an effect that's appropriate for brick. If you have one that's for mud or water, maybe you have an appropriate sound or an effect for that, right? In Solar Purge, we kind of have that set up, for physical materials in the world, but also enemy types, and we give them a blood color type. So if you're shooting, like Starship Trooper style, you're shooting an alien bug and it has purple blood, and we mark that alien, hey, you have purple blood. When it hits it says, what's your physical material? And say enemy purple. So then it'll spawn the correct, whatever off of that. So does anybody have any questions about how these line traces work? The math is a little bit strange, but basically wherever your start point is, right? You can take that, get the rotation, that's your direction, get the forward vector, right vector, whichever way you want it to go, and then multiply it by a number, that's how far it stretches, and then add it back to the start point. That's your end. And then based on this information, you can decide to do whatever you want. So if you want to apply damage or check to see if something's in the way. Lots of neat things you can do with that. Cool. Does anybody have any questions about spawning actors, projectiles, or line traces? No? Alrighty. Cool. Well, I will upload this to YouTube, and then I'll let everybody get back to work.